Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, namaskar, whatever part of the globe you are in, be it in New Zealand, so good evening. If you are in somewhere in Asia, good afternoon, good morning, and in the Americas, probably good evening too. But thank you so much for joining us. My name is Sunil Kaushal. It's a weekender on Sunday. I'm your host. And we do welcome you in a world in turmoil, as if coronavirus wasn't enough and the various sublets of Corona, Delta, and now Omicron. And now we have a war to deal with. But we'll leave those things aside, but talk about New Zealand, what's happening here in our home, in our backyard. The anti-mandate, anti-vax protesters are still going on, but reducing in numbers in the parliament. The government or the police still hasn't been able to do much. I think it's gone far too long and it should have been dealt by now. We'll see how the week goes. The Omicron numbers in New Zealand have been on the rise, touching roughly 15,000. And I think we are going to expect a few more surges to come through before it kind of declines. The message in that is get vaccinated, double vaccinated, get boosted. That's one of the ways to protect our community, protect our whānau, protect yourself, actually. People say we are doing it for the nation. No, you're doing it for yourself because the nation is not going to die. If anything happens, it'll be to you. And then the system is burdened because you delayed it. Moving on to other things, there's in sports, there's a great test match going between New Zealand and South Africa in Canterbury in Christchurch. And at the moment, it's quite evenly balanced. In politics, this week has been a little bit up and down. We haven't seen any new polls come, but it seems like all the parties, not just the two parties, but all the parties are now beginning to plan their year. And talking about parties, today's guest it comes from who has just taken over the reins of a fairly new party, which was founded in 2016, in November 2016. And we are very fortunate to have the new leader of that party. And I'll ask him a little bit about what the party is, because many of our viewers, our listeners would not have heard of it, or if they heard of it, they would not know what the policies are. And not only that, a little bit about himself and what drove him to get into politics, what are his likes, what's his vision for 2023 coming up elections next year. So our guest today is the leader of the Opportunities Party, Raf Manji. He comes from a very diverse background. Raf has been a two-time councillor for Christchurch City Council. He comes from a very economic finance background. Seems like most of the parties, you talk about John Key, James Shaw, and now Raf Manji. They all have this great background in economics and in finance, and their passions is to drive the economic change for and the well-being of our people of New Zealand. So it's great to have him join us today, and welcome to the show, Ralph.
Yeah, namaskar, Sunil. Thanks for having me on this lovely Sunday afternoon of Test cricket.
Yeah, thanks very much for joining us and giving. We won't hold you up too much. You can go back and see the closing day. Hopefully, our bowlers are doing well. They avoided the follow on, but look, coming back to basically, who is Raf?
That's a good question. I am from North London. Both my parents were immigrants to London back in the 60s, which will be a familiar story for many of your viewers who are in different countries. And I, spent most of my life in London in terms of schooling. Went to university in Manchester and studied economics. Spent nearly 2 years backpacking around Asia when I left university, including 5 months in India, traveling around on buses and trains pretty much over the whole country, which was pretty exciting. And then when I came back to London, I got into the financial markets and spent 11 years primarily trading markets focused on G7 currencies and bonds as well. And then in around 2000, decided to move on and try different things. I was married to a New Zealand girl from Christchurch, and we decided to move to Christchurch in 2002 after 9/11. Actually, I was starting to see a lot of strains in Europe, and felt that New Zealand would be a better place to bring up the kids. So we moved over here, and then really the next sort of 10 years, I did other stuff. I went back to university twice. I did a master's in international law and politics. I did a lot of work in the NGO and community sector, volunteering. My skills. I worked for budget services for a number of years, worked with children of prisoners, worked with refugees in terms of resettlement. And then we had the earthquakes in Christchurch in 2010 and 2011. And that kind of brought me into the kind of political sphere in terms of the work I was doing after the earthquakes, working with the student volunteer army and trying to think, how could I be of service? And the then Labour MP Leanne Dalzell, who was thinking about standing for mayor in 2013, sort of said, look, would you be interested in standing for council? I need somebody with a financial background because the finances were in a very parlous state. We had, $1 billion insurance claim. It was a real mess. So I sort of said, okay, I'll do that. I didn't really know much about local government. My focus had always been at a national kind of global macro level. And I stood in the election, got elected, somewhat to many people's surprise, because they thought, well, nobody knows who you are. How are you going to get elected? But, I knew quite a few people in my community. And I think the financial background was welcome for a lot of people. And then, spent the next 6 years, digging Christchurch out of that financial hole and getting the city back on track, engaging a lot with central government at the same time. And then, stepped down from council. And my plan really was to probably move up to Wellington and get more involved in policy work. But we had, sadly, the 15th of March terror attack just 6 months before I was leaving council. And I got, pulled into that to work with the survivors. And I did that really for the next 18 months. So that was a kind of slight change of plan. And there were lots of challenges in that role, acting on the financial side in terms of managing donations that had been given to the survivors, but also acting as a community advocate and dealing with many issues which affect all migrant communities, issues like employment, housing, how to access welfare, educational issues. So I did that till probably the end of 2020 and then moved up to Wellington about a year ago. And I've just been doing some kind of policy consulting work and thought I was out of politics, really. And then I got asked if I'd consider taking over the leadership of the Opportunities Party. And after some careful thought, I said, yeah, why not? It's a party that I'm aligned with in terms of values and focus and approach in terms of policy and the way they like to approach politics as well, which is a much more collaborative, working with all people as much as possible. So that's a little bit about me.
Oh, that's great. Look, thanks very much for sharing that in detail. I know your work at Asia, New Zealand also, and we've
Mm.
crossed our paths a couple of times. And I think, it's great to have someone. I think when you mentioned just previously about, being surprised to be a councillor, elected as a councillor, I think it did come as a surprise to many. But from a Indian diaspora point of view, I think everyone was very proud that at least someone, unknown name did come. So, what was the you probably obviously thought a lot about it, but what was it, as in a personal decision, that made you, stand for the council?
I think it was really wanting to help out after the earthquakes and trying to think, can we do government in a better way? People always complaining about councils, always complaining about being charged, too much in rates. And I thought, surely we can do this better. Surely there's a better way of delivering services to the public in a more efficient way. But to be fair, that was quite difficult to achieve. The whole structure of local government makes things quite difficult. And I mean, we'll see in the upcoming elections, both council candidates and mayoral candidates promise an awful lot, but they find out when they're elected, there's not much they can really do. And we need to look at local government. And, when I look at the three waters proposals by the government, I think actually deal with the local government structure first and then deal with the water after. You can fund water infrastructure quite easily without restructuring everything. So I think local government matters, but we have to be clear about, in a way, what matters to people at the local level as opposed to the national level. So often people speak to councillors and say, can you do this? And it's like, no, we can't. That's central government. And one of our problems is local government has got so big that it's starting to conflict with central government, but central government makes laws that local government has to implement, and they often don't have the tools to do so. So it's a bit like two operating systems. Central government is, iOS, Apple, and local government is Android, and the two systems just don't integrate very well. People just
we know about systems, Safari and Chrome.
yeah, a
But
bit like that as well.
yeah, uh, just moving on to now the Opportunities Party. We know that, and some of our viewers will know, but not many would know that Gareth Morgan started it and then, moved on, and now you are the leader. I think you're the fourth leader, if I'm not wrong.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. Uh, but so, can you give us a background about the Opportunities Party? Why did Gareth start it? And obviously, the focus has changed, and then I'll come to the policies that are there, etc. So, just what is the Opportunity Party, or the TOP as it is called?
Yeah, I mean, it's a party known for its focused on policies that work, essentially, evidence-based policies. It's essentially a fairly centrist liberal party. We're socially liberal, financially smart, progressive in our thinking, and, looking to see how can we create opportunities for all? How can we create a fairer playing field? And I guess without, wanting to talk on behalf of Gareth, essentially he could see there were structural issues in our economy where we had just too much capital going into housing and not enough capital going into investment in businesses, productive enterprise. And so that's the primary driver for setting that party up and taking let's say, a more evidence focused approach to solving the problems that we have. So essentially, housing and income are two big policy platforms. So in terms of taxing housing properly and then cutting income tax at the same time. So rebalancing the economy so that people actually get to keep more of what they earn, are incentivized, to invest in businesses and not so much investment into housing because it doesn't do any of us any good. And now in the last, let's say, 4 years of the current government, house prices are up 60%. And I mean, that's just an unsustainable position. So our focus really is rebalancing the system so that we're focused much more on productive investment and making sure that people actually have more to live on.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. I mean, given your economics background, you're probably, the right person for one of the, or most of, well, two
I
of
hope
them.
so. I hope
Right.
so.
Yeah, affordable housing and rent, and then universal basic income, which I'll come to, and climate-friendly recovery. But talking about housing, affordable housing, etc., and you mentioned a few things, So how would Top address the housing debacle at the moment? And it's easy to say, oh, it was the national government's problem, and then we know that Labor really campaigned on housing, and now we say, oh, we can't. It's the housing market. You can't do it. Inflation's going through this roof now, and there's stock. Supply chain issues there. There's interest rates rising up. God forbid if we see foreclosures coming up through the later on in the year or maybe next year, and it's going to hit. So from Top's point of view, how do you propose that you would address this?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'd say we have to address it, as you say, before things get out of hand. We saw what happened in the US in 2008, where people became very over leveraged. I don't think we're in that same position here because interest rates are still quite low. But clearly they're going to go up a little bit. That's being priced in to the market already. But essentially, I mean, the Prime Minister talks about the levers a lot, and there are a lot of levers you have to pull with housing. The important thing is you actually have to pull them. You can't just look at them. And I think there has been a certain, I guess, focus on things like the supply of land. Now, land supply is extremely important. So some of our zoning is way too restrictive, and that drives up the price of land. At the same time, the incentives to develop are not there. It's very expensive. Resource consenting processes are very difficult. So we put a lot of barriers in the way of investors in terms of development. Our tax settings, which is one of Top's big focuses, encourages people to buy housing as an investment. So of course that creates problems for particularly first home buyers who are trying to get into the market. And I guess that supply of houses available creates issues for rents, where we're not having enough houses built. So you've got a range of different issues. And I think the way that Top would approach it is, yes, increasing the supply of housing, but make sure there's funding to build houses. So we would support the community housing sector, for example, with an open line of credit to build houses. We would look at reducing the amount of leverage.
In other words, what you're saying is bring back the state houses. Or what
the state advances corporation, yeah, because we talk a lot about land supply, but you still need the funding to build the houses, and that often is quite challenging. So we have a public housing waiting list of 25,000 people. God knows how many households that is. Now, the community housing sector, which is quite well developed now, is often ready. They've got things they want to do. They don't have the funding. So I would actually say you can build as many houses as you like till you clear that list and beyond. And also other incentives for developers in the general market, let's say building over a certain number of units, maybe remove GST on those building costs, maybe help them with funding. So, and we just need to build a lot of houses. So anything we can do to make that happen is critical.
Mentioned, Raf, you mentioned one thing about, and I want to ask you, because you've been on the council itself, as a councillor, and now you're leading a political party. You mentioned the supply of land, right? Our viewers would probably think, well, supply of land, is that a government thing or is that a council thing? Because then we go into zoning, right? We don't have the standard, the development cost that the council charges, for a piece of land, let's say 800 square meter, you want to subdivide in Auckland, one subdivision will probably cost you around, let's say 60 to 80,000. Down and somewhere in Rangiora or, some other place, it might be just 20,000. Different, you can't compare apples to apples in this thing. But, is it the government's thing about the land or is it the council's?
Well, essentially it's a council issue. It's a local government issue that local government deals with through a traditional district plan. Now, what we saw, if we look at the two cities who've kind of got on top of things a little bit, and that's Christchurch and Auckland. So Auckland had the unitary plan. It took a long time to get it through, but it did provide an increase in land supply. Now, land prices have still gone up, but essentially, when I look at inner city Auckland, rents there are quite stable now. The same in Christchurch after the earthquakes, the government essentially rezoned the whole city and surrounding areas. Now, that was a challenge because local government has processes where everyone has to have their say. And of course, then you get the NIMBY brigade who basically block everything. So actually, I think the examples of Christchurch and Auckland show that central government needs to step in and actually provide a broader approach to upzoning and rezoning and just say, we're taking this off councils and everyone's just going to have to get used to the fact that we need to build more houses. And in inner cities, we should have more density, no doubt about that. And then obviously you can cascade that as you go out into the suburbs. But we've got plenty of land in New Zealand. You know, it's kind of ridiculous that land prices are so high.
Yeah. So, so what you're saying is, and as I understand, is that Top will advocate for more development of houses and also social housing as such, so that everyone gets it, and thus stabilizing the housing market.
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing we can do for our whole economy is sort out the housing market because for most people, that eats up, well, we'd like it to be 35% of disposable income, but for some people, it's like close to 50. And I think in Auckland, it's, you know, as high as 55%.
Yeah.
Now that, you know, that's not good economics at all. So if we can sort that out, it will enable people to do other things, such as start new businesses or do other things with their lives.
Sure. The other thing is, so you're not against the capital gain tax?
No, our approach would be a land tax. So we're looking at the moment, we're doing some modeling around the land value tax, which is essentially a small annual charge on the land value of property. Now, this has been around for a long time. A lot of economists like it from the left and the right because it's quite efficient. It's easy to collect, particularly in New Zealand. We already have a land value rating system, and it's quite fair and equitable, and it encourages the development of bare land as well. And it's just a fair way. The problem with capital gains tax is it doesn't really help with land prices, whereas a land value tax actually does tend to put a bit of a lid on the price of land, much more efficient. Um, and I think that's probably the best way to go. So in a way, the capital gains tax, if you look at it overseas, it doesn't particularly restrain prices. It doesn't help with supply. And I think the problem is we've waited way too long to bring it in. We sort of have a capital gains tax with the bright line test. They should just call it a capital gains tax, and at least people would understand that. Yeah,
I think, yeah, that would be much easier. Ref,
yeah.
most people would not or may not have heard of universal basic income,
Mm.
which Top is advocating. You would have a question like, you know, why, with my skills and talent and experience, should I be at par with others? So, how do you explain it?
Well, essentially, it's think of it as a basic support for everyone in society. It's based around the concept of human dignity, and it recognizes the huge amount of unpaid work that people do in our day-to-day economy. It's something like 25% of GDP. It recognizes people who are caring in lots of different ways and don't always get the support that they need. It recognizes people who are in precarious work, who are in the gig economy, particularly people who might be studying, arts and cultures sector, you know, to people who don't always have a steady stream of work. Now, the important thing is here, it's quite a small amount. It's at the moment $13,000 a year, but it makes quite a big difference. It's set basically at the standard benefit level. But for those people who, I mean, there are two generally things people worry about is I don't need it, so why are you giving it to me? Well, we're going to tax it back on the land side. So essentially, we're doing a tax switch between land and income. And those people who go, oh, you know, people are just going to sit around all day and do nothing. Well, it's not enough money to sit around all day and do nothing. But actually, all the research shows that actually it frees people up to do other things. All the research studies around essentially direct cash payments show that people use it to invest in education, to support their health, to support their communities. So it's a much fairer way of doing it. And essentially, another way to look at it is we're creating a tax-free threshold for all people at around $40,000. So it's actually quite a powerful support for people on lower incomes.
So basically, if you earn up to 39,999, you get that 13,000.
Yep.
So which is basically 53,000 a year. Your income would be 53,000.
No. The 13,000 is part of that, but essentially, when you look at it from a tax perspective, it creates a tax-free threshold at $39,000. So essentially, we're bringing in. I mean, another part of the proposal is a flat tax at 33% for all income. That creates, a very, very flat playing field. Again, incentivizes people, but allows people to keep more of their income.
Okay, so anyone earning more than 40,000 would not benefit from that. So would the other benefits that IRD give and work and income, is that a separate thing, or is it part of, or would it be part of this universal basic income?
That would be a separate thing. Anything to do with, say, health and disability would be dealt with separately. But I mean, just to go back to your point, I would say actually when you look at the tax, including the land value tax and the universal basic income, pretty much anyone earning under 100,000 is going to be better off under this tax policy.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Now coming to your third policy, which is climate-friendly recovery. And we know, climate change is a huge topic for all of us. Some may believe, some may not believe it. So, what's the stance for climate change, especially obviously the farmers? As you know, New Zealand's backbone is the farmers. Is it farmer friendly?
Look, I think so. I mean, I think that the way to think about it is making sure that businesses and farming as a business pay the full costs of their production. So any external costs, such as greenhouse gas emissions, methane emissions, which actually have a negative cost to society, are paid for. That's one way of looking at it. When we look at fresh water and our policy around that, if you pollute waterways, you should pay to clean it up. So these are kind of normal business costs. So actually, we want to say to farmers, this is something that your customers are quite interested in. And we're seeing a huge push to make sure that prices reflect the costs of those inputs. So that's one way of looking at it. So I don't think it's about, demonizing farmers. It's making sure that we're working with farmers so that their products are priced correctly. The customers understand that. And it's a win-win for everyone. So, farming is extremely important in New Zealand. There are some, just watch Country Calendar at the weekend. Some of the stuff that our farmers are doing is first class. And actually, we want people to know more about that story. So I think we have to address these issues. Climate change is a major challenge to us. Issues around drought, issues around fire, issues around quality of topsoil. We have to manage our environment, as best we can. And the best way to do that is making sure that people understand the costs of using those ecosystem services and pay for them.
So that was the farmer's side, but would someone who's got a takeaway, or that someone who is in transportation or different jobs, would someone like me be also part of this climate change policy? Will I also be paying for it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in a way, the costs travel throughout the economy. And actually, the best thing we can do is make sure that people understand and can actually see those costs so that it gives them an opportunity to reduce them. So if you say to business, here's an extra cost, business is going to go, well, I don't particularly like that. Well, this is how you can reduce that cost. So obviously the way that we travel, the way that we get around, obviously the cheapest mode of transport is walking, no cost. So I'm living here in Wellington, I walk everywhere. So my carbon emissions profile has collapsed.
You haven't got a choice at the moment, right?
Yeah. Now that's true.
Probably not with your tinfoil.
But then also you have people who need to transport themselves somewhere. So is public transport suitable for them? There are a lot of people who have to drive. So how do we deal with that? So we prefer looking at probably solutions that are transparent. So for example, a carbon tax, and then potentially a dividend where that tax collected is shared back to people through income taxes.
So you talked about, this is in direct proportional to transportation. What's your thinking around, making it more affordable for people to to be able to commute. I mean, if you want to reduce the carbon emission and the greenhouse gases, etc., I would think electrification would be a much better option. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, if I look at, say, in what's being proposed in Auckland in terms of the huge transport plan, $16 billion, tunnels everywhere. I mean, you'd probably think just buy a lot of electric buses, have them going everywhere, and make them free. So I like the proposal that the mayoral candidate in Auckland, Efisa Collins. Yeah, absolutely. If you want to get people onto public transport, make it accessible, make it free. And then if you can actually make that transport low or zero carbon emissions, you've solved a lot of problems. And I can guarantee it's a lot cheaper than spending $16 billion, tunneling through half of Auckland.
But Raf,
And
what is going to power those electric buses?
well, electricity.
I mean, electricity then generated from coal, right?
Well, I mean that's I guess the other side of the equation. How do we build an energy resilient country? So we've got all this energy being generated down in T.Y. Point. Is that going to the right use? We need to build obviously more energy generation. Where do we do that? So the government is looking at the on Lake Onslow, for example. Is that the right answer? I don't know, but we've had actually quite a few people approach us to work in the energy policy space. So there's a lot of interest in that. So you can't think of any of these things in isolation. It's like you say, I mean, we have the same conversation in India. Oh, just put everyone on electricity. Yeah, how do you produce the electricity? It's not that easy, So, and we see what's going on in Germany. Germany downgraded its nuclear power stations, importing gas from Russia. Now that's a problem. Everyone goes, oh, I wish we had that nuclear generation still, which is essentially actually carbon emission free. So yeah, these are conversations that we have to have. And energy resilience and energy security, particularly for our biggest city in Auckland, alongside water, is actually a critical conversation.
Sure. Just before we wrap up, now I know you've just taken over the realms of the party. What's your vision from now till 2023? I mean, T.O.P has always been polling, in those 1 or 2%, sometimes obviously gone up, and obviously from your point of view, you would want to get through that threshold. What's your vision there, winning the local seat or going into bid with one of the parties, like ACT has done? So we want to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, a very good point on the polling. So, I mean, the target, and we're quite open about this, we need to be polling at 3 or 4% by the end of the year, because what that does is it tells a lot of our potential voters that we can get to 5%. So one of the big feedbacks is wasted vote. Why would we vote for you? And this is a problem in a way with that threshold, is it creates all this dancing around. If we got rid of the threshold, people would just vote for whoever they wanted to support. End of story. So, but that's a problem that we have to deal with. We'll do a lot of hard work this year. We'll do, obviously once COVID is over, hopefully, getting out, talking to people. I'm certainly looking for good candidates up in Auckland who represent the people of Auckland, which is our Asia Pacific city. And yeah, I mean, nothing other than just getting out and talking to people is going to change that and show people actually that we're a credible party who will do a good job if we get into Parliament. We've been very clear that we will work with either Labour and the Greens or National and ACT. So we're kind of sitting there in a more open space. We're not partnered with any particular party, and we hopefully will bring our skills and intelligence to help them make good policy.
Raf Manji, leader of the Opportunities Party, thank you so much for your time on a Sunday afternoon. You still have about 17 minutes to watch the cricket.
I'll certainly look forward to that. Yeah, it's a good game. It's a good game.
Yeah, but thank you so much for enlightening us on your policies, on your background, why you have been chosen to lead this party in the coming elections and the hard work you have been doing. We wish you all the best, and thank you very much, and hope to talk to you soon.
Yeah, I look forward to it. I look forward to getting up to Auckland and getting out and about and talking to people up there. So thanks for your time.
Thanks, Raf. That was the leader of the T.O.P party, the Opportunities Party, Raf Manji, recently elected as the leader. He comes from a varied background in finance and risk and governance, being two-time councillor in the Christchurch Council, and now he's got the mission to lead the party, as he explained, between 3 to 4%. If he can get it, I think they have a good chance of making a dent. Anyway, viewers, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm your host, Sunil Kaushal. Today is 27th of February, and we do look forward to joining you again next week, coming onto your screens, be it on your phone or iPad or tablet or on your computer screens or on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Thank you so much once again for your time and allowing us to share with you today's episode. I wish you all the best for this coming week. Stay safe, get jabbed, get boosted, and we'll see you next Sunday. Good night.